one of the things that Roger Williams University does, they actually they have an oyster hatchery where they breed oysters, but they breed oysters for restoration projects. And there's a project, this man that's presenting here, his name's Steve Patterson, and he works out of Roger Williams University, and he does what's called the Rhode Island Ogre Project, which is the Rhode Island oyster gardening for restoration and enhancement. And he actually grows oysters in the oyster hatchery at Roger Williams University, and then he puts them out into different places he puts some in Narragansett Bay, he puts them in ponds to try and make those environments better. So whether it is to clean out pollutants, so that's something that he is planning to do down to Sheffield Cove, which is walking distance from our school. So our hope is that we can hook on to what he's doing, help him out. He looks for volunteers to help actually go and put the oyster bags, put the shell bags out for growing oysters, flip the bags, check the bags. So that's something that we could very easily latch onto and also have the educational aspect of that. So it's something we can do in the classroom without having to do large field trips on buses and things like that. This is Watson Farm. So one area of study, again, in 6th grade was sustainable living. One of the things that the students did at Watson Farm is they went out and the Mintos talked to them about how they use their farm for animals, for plants, things like that. And one of the things they talked about is, well, how much land do you need to have a certain number of cows? And they talked about how many acres you needed. And they said to the students, well, do you know how big an acre is? And a lot of students said, no, we don't know. So they actually did an exercise with them where they measured out how big an acre is. So they had a measuring wheel, and the students measured out a full acre. And I actually was there for this field trip, and it was very interesting to see an acre with nothing on it. There's no house on it, it's just 1 acre of land. And this was the comment that I learned how big an acre is. I learned how math and science are closely connected. Again, that is, that was one of our goals, is for students to understand that math is the language of science. You need to know the math in order to do the science. Endangered species. So this was a program that we had in the past where students went to the Roger Williams Zoo to learn about endangered species. We changed this up a little bit because what we found was many of our students had been to the zoo. They've gone there, they've seen the animals. Roger Williams Zoo actually has an educational program where they come into the classroom and teach the students about, this was called the diversity of life, and it was, well, how do species become endangered? And they brought in and allowed the students to really figure out what producers are, what are consumers, what are secondary consumers, how does an animal become extinct, and why does it become extinct? And then they brought in some animals. So it was a hands-on piece, but it was more lecture-oriented, and it was not going to the zoo, but I think there was more education that came out of it for the students. And it didn't take a whole day out of our school day to go to the zoo. It was 1 hour, but I think that the content was there in that 1 hour. It was very focused content. This is the Matunic Oyster Farm. The man that's standing up there, his name is Perry Rasso, and he is, if you in the Rhode Island aquaculture world, he's the person, anyone you talk to, they know Perry Rasso. He's sort of this one who's very passionate about aquaculture, about preserving the environment, not polluting the environment, and he's made this his life. So he has an oyster farm at 7 acres on Potter's Pond, where he farms oysters. And he's made it his business. He actually has a restaurant that's part of that. So he grows his oysters and then he has a restaurant. So the 6th grade went on a field trip here. Where they're all sitting is actually the deck of his restaurant. And he made it into his classroom the morning we went. So he set up 50 chairs, made a classroom, talked to the students about why he believes in this oyster gardening. Why is it good for the environment? Why is aquaculture important? So this was the discussion aspect of it. This was the fun part. We actually waded out into the water at Potter's Pond, waded out waist deep, and he took us out to see the oyster beds. He pulled up his nets, he showed us the oysters, the size of the oysters, why are the oysters important? How do I know when the oysters are large enough? How do I know that the oysters are doing good for the pond? How do I test the salinity of the pond? How do I test the pollutants in the pond? So here are our students wading out in the water. these are the nets that he pulled up, and he allowed each of the students to actually hold an oyster, look at the oysters, look at their size, and then he actually opened them up. He had a dock out in the middle of the water that we went to. I know you think this is a blank screen, but what I want to show you is, there is something here. This is the video. So this is his dock. We're actually in the water, and I know you can't hear it that well. But what I want to be able to show you is one of the things that we purchased as part of this grant is flip cameras, which are these little handheld cameras, and I can show you one. But we purchased 20 of them, and our thought is that students will be able to take these cameras with them on the field trips. I mean, they're small, they're high definition cameras, but what they can do is to do these little video clips so that when we go on field trips, they can actually document them. So this is just, I just wanted to show you one of the clips. It does play better. This is a little bit of PowerPoint, embedding inside PowerPoint. So I just wanted to show you the video clip. And sort of the fun part of the end of this is he opened one of the oysters and talked to them about the different parts of the oysters, and then he showed them how to shuck an oyster, and then he ate it. So, you know, students eat them? No, students didn't eat anything, I promise you that. Wow. That's right. But, you know,
oysters on the half shell, that's great.
But it was very, you know, for the kids, it was very interesting. You know, they were like, ooh, did he eat that? It just kind of made it fun for them. So.
It's neat for you to see that.
Yes, and that is another important part. He's young and he's very energetic, and the students like that about him, that he could sort of talk their language, but he was talking about something bigger and very educational for them. And again, they were able to extend what they had learned in the classroom to what was there. Moving into 7th and 8th grade. 7th and 8th grade study electricity. And we started the electricity unit with a speaker from National Grid. Bill Pratt came in from National Grid. He's an employee at National Grid in marketing. He came in to talk about electricity generation, talk about National Grid and the model that National Grid had for electricity generation and distribution, and how their business model is changing given renewable energy sources, their smart grid, which is really how do you sell electricity back to National Grid. How are they going to do that? Net metering. So he started his presentation with a unit on just basic electricity. What is electricity? And this was the beginning of the 7th and 8th grade going into electricity. He was great with the students. They had some really good questions that they asked him about, you know, what will National Grid do in the future? How will we use renewable energy? Some broader questions that didn't necessarily deal with electricity, but dealt with, you know, how is this going to fit into my world, which is what we want them to think about, make it relevant to them. So one of the comments back was, I learned a lot of things, but mostly about electricity and how it all works. So after they had their initial presentation on electricity, students were asked to bring in, hopefully, non-working electrical components from their homes. And so you can see some cell phones here. So what Jim Kaczynski did in his classroom is he actually had the students take these components apart and break them down, and they actually organized each of the components to find out what do electrical components have in them, what do they have in common, can we identify parts. So he helped them learn what's a resistor, what's a transistor, how do these things work, what do they do. So, you know, why do I have a resistor and a transistor in my phone, and why do I also have it in this old broken alarm clock? What do they do for electricity? So this is the, and they organized all of them. So this is just one of the photos of that. And this was the comment. I learned that electricity is used to operate many of everyone's everyday household items. Just an extension of that was, and this is how, you know, we had always hoped that we were enhancing the science and math curriculum, but we're enhancing the curriculum all around within the school. So Stephanie Pamula, the art teacher, actually took all of the components and she made an art project out of it. She gave the students their components, and they could develop anything they wanted. Some developed animals, some developed robots, and I wish that these were still here, but I think they got taken down yesterday.
Taken down, actually.
But there was a big table of them in the front, and it was really interesting to see what the students had done with them.